Contains lead poison, at least your complexion will bring all the boys in. Anyway, it's raining. And here I thought I'd have good light for filming today. So, since my very first video on this channel, let's just say my patience with ITV has been tested on more than one occasion. First things first, I start analysing their version of Catherine of Aragon in their 2003 miniseries, Henry VIII, and I'm like, okay. But then they provide a non-consensual sex scene between Henry and Anne Boleyn. Really helped with the analytic process, but still, I'm like, okay. But thank God I made enough videos in my first year just in time to watch Emily Blunt play Catherine Howard. Bit miscast, but back in 2003 she was just starting out in her career, so she had to flash her chest and be like, okay. So now, it's 2012, the 100th anniversary of the Titanic sinking is coming up. And ITV is trying really, really hard to compete with the BBC. They're making Downton Abbey with Julian Fellows, and the BBC's like, okay. And they're thinking really, really hard about what a series about the Titanic would look like. But then they get Julian Fellows to just make Downton Abbey again, but this time it's on the ocean, in a ship. And Julian Fellows is like, okay. So then we get the Titanic miniseries, and suddenly we're seeing someone who actually existed, who actually helped people escape the ship, who actually died in the sinking, being forced to lock people up in a cupboard to drown. Now. I just don't think that's very good representation. So I'm like, no way. There are debates online as to whether the ITV miniseries is worse than the CBS miniseries, because in live action terms, excluding the animated movies, they're the biggest imitators of a James Cameron movie, really. Honestly, the only reason that this has been put higher than the CBS version is because the acting was a lot better, and I mean a lot better. Julian Fellows is an unforgivable Tory, but he's at least very good at getting actors to work for him and be in his state-sponsored propaganda. I promise I won't spend the whole video dunking on Julian Fellows. Technically, I did work for him as a dresser when School of Rock was on tour, and it just happened to come to the theatre I worked to. He and Andrew Lloyd Webber, technically, they paid for this skirt. Although I do find it ironic that the most famous song in School of Rock is called Stick It to the Man, and the music was written by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and the book was written by Julian Fellows. Like, they're peers of the realm. They're the man they can get. Andrew Lloyd Webber is so much the man, he decided, I'm going to fly over from New York overnight just so I can vote to make poor people pay more tax. Like, the guy's got good musicals, but he's a terrible person. Normally in these videos I'd summarise the main plot and put the technical stuff in afterwards. What you doing, Alan? He treats Dawes like he's the alien from Signs. He also doesn't like water. Come on, baby. You see, it opens like so. He's not very bright, but he's absolutely adorable. Much like Downton Abbey, there is a desire to show how much is happening in this relatively small space, while the rest of the world affects its circumstances. The difference is Downton Abbey had multiple seasons to tell these character arcs. So what might have worked better as a 10-part miniseries along the lines of Titanic Blood and Steel is smushed into 4 hours, and quite a lot of stuff is repeated. What's interesting is Downton Abbey actually opened with the aftermath of the Titanic sinking. The Crawley heirs were on that ship, and their deaths are the inciting incidents for the whole series. As both shows are produced by ITV and made by Julian Fellows, perhaps their best bet would have been to follow those two Crawleys throughout the voyage and sinking, interacting with other characters, and maybe they could have had servants with them to interact with stewards and steerage passengers. The ideal narrative was just sitting there, but it was ignored due to ambition. As with CBS, I will do my best to avoid talking about the James Cameron film and try to view it on its own merits or lack thereof. While the CBS series tried to cash in on the hype surrounding the movie and possibly trick audiences into thinking this was the film everyone was so crazy about, ITV had to actively compete for attention. Being the 100th anniversary of the sinking, the film was being re-released to cinemas in 3D. I remember my sister and I went to go and watch it together. We both bought large popcorns and sodas, but didn't need to go to the bathroom once. And every time Bernard Hill spoke, we just kept quoting Lord of the Rings and how is poor Julian Fellows meant to compete with that? Through sheer bloody arrogance, that's how. I'm getting serious flashbacks to Legend Goes On in this series with the number of plot lines we have to follow. Kind of odd that I know the characters' names in that film, but I can't remember anyone else's in this series unless they actually existed. On top of the real characters who interact with some of the main storylines, we have a rich earl, his snobby wife, their rebellious daughter, a couple who are new money and become ostracised, dissatisfied married couple in second class, stereotypical Irish family in steerage, servants of the Earl and their unspoken attraction, this guy whose very appearance screams serial killer, and guess what, he is a serial killer, Mario and Paolo, and Luigi Paolo's spontaneous romance with the worst Doctor Who companion.
Why are you boring me? I'm right!
The whole miniseries seems to carry a pompous, I know better than the guy who makes multiple documentaries and actually filmed the wreck for the movie air about it. It was good of them to at least show some of the real people who have gone overlooked in previous versions, such as Dorothy Gibson and the Widener family. But when it comes to those who have been portrayed several times, you get a sense of laziness about them. Murdoch descends into incoherent Scottish caterwauling.
Remove to the stern and wait for rescue!
I didn't get a word of that.
Lightoller seems like an homage to
Kenneth More,
but because the storyline isn't focused on him, it doesn't land the way it should, and the actor doesn't have the same charisma.
Oh, of course, madam. Soap is no laughing matter. It was the suggestion of criticism. Of the advertisement, sir, not the ship.
Second Officer Charles Lightoller, at your service.
Captain Smith is much like the Barbara Stanwyck version, who drifts about the ship talking to passengers. Thomas Andrews, who thematically works as a voice for the ship herself, is forgotten pretty quickly, and I think the editing has something to do with that, but we'll get to the editing in a moment. Bruce Ismay. Guys, can we please stop being mean to Bruce Ismay? You know I'm very anti-capitalist, but even I think some of the interpretations of him are going too far. You had 100 years to put a new spin on this guy, and all you could think of was, let's not just make him an arsehole, we'll make him a murdering arsehole. That whole people are expecting it thing is a real cop-out. Isn't the whole point of writing to subvert expectations? Make people think. Yeah, and this leads me into how 6th Officer Moody is portrayed. Moody is one of the officers who is rarely seen beyond his answering the call from the lookouts at the start of the disaster. Whoever it was that wished to see more of Officer Moody in a Titanic drama must have done it on a monkey's paw. Throughout the series, there's a running theme where the first-class passengers are prejudicial towards any and all Italians, but they're more than happy to eat their food. In the 19th century, there were some prejudices against Italian people, perceiving them as corrupt and dishonest, which started in 1820 and was likely carried through to the early 20th century. Someone better versed in the subject will have to let me know down in the comments. Anyway, Bruce Ismay thinks the Italian stewards will cause too much of a scene if they're allowed to go on the boat deck. So, he commands Moody to lock them in a closet. One, I don't think Moody would have acquiesced to that demand if he knew the ship was sinking, and would be giving those men a death sentence by locking them up. And two, it's trying to villainise Ismay in the worst way possible, and drags Moody down with him. Contrary to popular belief, Ismay had very little say as to how the ship was run during the voyage, and he certainly didn't have the authority over the officers, because remember his interaction with Officer Lowe.
Release their boats from their lockdowns!
For God's sake, hurry.
There's no time to waste! Lower away! Lower away! Lower away! Get out the way, you fool! Do you want me to drown a lot of them? Do you know who I am? You are a passenger and I'm a ship's bloody officer. Now do as you're told!
Yes, quite right. Sorry,
Honestly, I think what Fellows did here was way worse than what Cameron did to Murdoch. That at least was based on the belief that an officer took his own life. but this was based on nothing at all. When it comes to the editing, I feel this was a serious effort to have a memorable gimmick. The first 3 episodes begin the same way, with characters boarding the Titanic, having the voyage, and then being on the ship, and then their actions in the build-up to the final plunge. And then episode 4 has more time dedicated to the sinking and aftermath. It's a little jarring, to say the least. I know the idea of it is to make the viewer notice stuff in the background and have it pay off in another episode. What I'm about to compare it with may be a little strange, but since I've been rewatching it lately, it comes to mind easily. In Attack on Titan, a lot of the time we get the execution of a long-term plan first, and it might be a while before we see how that plan came to fruition and see things pay off. But when it pays off, it's very satisfying. For example, at the beginning of the series, you're just as clueless as the characters as to where the Colossal Titan came from and what's outside the walls, but when you know that this was actually an attack from an enemy nation, it feels so much more full. In the ITV series, you have Maria Dore Kennedy call the snobby countess a bitch, but you don't know why until episode 2, when she tells her husband that she knows the countess is part Irish but denies her heritage. But because the number of plot lines are fighting for screen time, there wasn't enough to convince me that MDK had a reason for her outburst. As the filming for this series began less than a year before it was due to come out, this strange form of editing makes me think that the series creator, Nigel Stafford Clark, was determined to seem different, and he didn't think the story was enough to stand out. The sinking scenes remind me heavily of the Barbara Stanwyck film, again, especially given the existence of the couple in first class reconciling with their squabbles before the wife gets into the lifeboat with her grown-up daughter.
I can't, not on my own.
Georgiana.
Please, it's too high. No, I can't, please. Please, I'm sorry, I can't.
You're 26.
And the dumbass child who gets out of the boat while it's lowering. In this case, the child is dumbass Teresa. She gets out because she panics about the boat, and to the show's credit, it at least built up her nervousness about being on the ship, though her decision to go below decks and get trapped is confusing. What was she planning to do exactly? Anyway, she and her father find each other just before they both drown. While the exterior shots for the ship are actually pretty okay and better resemble the deck of the Titanic, because the few photos we have from the ship actually feature the decks, I think they only built one side of the ship. Obviously they needed to have the starboard side because that's where the collision was. As I watch the series, it seems most, if not all, exterior scenes are filmed from the starboard side. This revelation didn't sink in until I watched the end of episode 2, which ends with MDK and Toby Jones trying to flip the overturned collapsible B, and they're on the starboard side. I went to bed, and then I was like, oh, the collapsible. In the ITV series, it was on the wrong side of the ship. And then I fell asleep again. I find it odd that no one thought to flip the shot in post, probably because that also meant the letters on the sailors' hats would also have to be backwards, so when it's flipped it's okay. But it was pretty dark in those scenes, so what was the problem exactly? Once again, I feel the sinking was far too rushed. Had this series been given a couple more episodes to breathe, perhaps they could dedicate a whole episode to that first hour where people are being woken up and made to come on deck while the lifeboats are being prepped. As is, they want to jump straight into the drama as quickly as possible. One thing I will commend the series for is how it shows the breakup of the ship. It gives a good perspective, showing the ship was at a shallower angle than originally believed, and the way it's shot puts you at the level of someone in the water who's swimming towards collapsible B. When the lights go out in the ship, Titanic is just this black mass. As the audience, you see the breakup, while Mario has his back to the chaos. If you were in the water, you'd be too busy trying to survive to look at the ship. ITV finds a squirrel once in a blind moon, and this was it, I guess. The aftermath of the sinking ends so quickly. Once again, these people needed another episode. After the ship has sunk, we catch up with the characters who are either in the boats or trying to survive in the water. However, the coldness of the water doesn't seem to matter. Everyone seems to see each other quite clearly, and recognise each other when the darkness was a major factor as to why those in lifeboats thought it would be too dangerous to go back for survivors. Some people who are just hanging around in the water just get fished out and they're a little chilly, but don't worry, they're going to be okay. Apart from Paolo. There are the usual arguments about the passengers going back, especially with Clara over there thinking she's the main character, as usual. The series draws to a close as the Carpathia arrives, but this would have been the perfect opportunity to show the inquest that happened after the sinking, showing how the characters tried to move on from the disaster. But no, it just ends. There are a few text cards talking about who lived and who died, claiming in 100 years Titanic has not been forgotten. Meanwhile, this series already has been. What this series was really missing was breathing room. If you were to make a Titanic miniseries today, you need at least 10 episodes to get the full story in there. Have the first 2 episodes be about the building of Titanic and people getting on the ship, 5 episodes for the voyage, 2 for the sinking, and 1 for the aftermath, which includes all the hearings and stuff. And then it could sort of end in a far-off post-credit scene with the ship being found in the 80s. Like, that'd be cool. Another gripe I had with the series that I didn't know where to put anywhere else in the script is the socio-economic themes surrounding the Titanic aren't here. They're ignored. Like, the Irish are moving to America because what else are the Irish going to do in the 20th century? The Earl isn't so bad. Look, he's paying for his illegitimate daughter. He's not a bad rich person, unlike Bruce Ismay, the bastard. The Titanic was a perfect amalgamation of economic and class disparity that was prevalent in both Europe and America. Where's my sociology lecture with David Warner? But we don't get that because Julian Fellows is a Tory, and he doesn't see anything wrong with the system because he got his. And don't get me wrong, the CBS Titanic was really bad. This is just disappointing. Way to celebrate 100 years.